Hi everyone, this is Sovereign Key, Lauda Leon, and today I have an amazing guest. His name is Mario Sarmiento. He is an astrologer who incorporates meteorology, asteroids, human design, intuitive astrology, and other aspects that we will get into in his immense library of wisdom. We're going to be actually reviewing someone in particular who's very special and looking into his chart, and together we're going to be exploring the depths of what these ancient technologies that we've been handed down teach us and how they allow us to see into the window of our own lives on many levels that are taking place, because cosmically speaking, we are the manifestation of everything that we are cosmically. So this example that we're going to be studying today and presenting to you is on Ra Uru Hu, who himself was the creator of human design. And we're going to be looking into his chart, and Mario is going to be discussing very many amazingly interesting aspects to Ra, and also into what we're going to end with, which is deeper philosophical revelations. Mario?
Yeah, so I'm going to speak a little about, I think I'll start with saying, for those who may know or may not know, Ra Uru Hu was a man living in Ibiza, Spain during the 1987 supernova. And it was sometime in January where he was hit with the energy, as many people were around the world. And he was able to take in this information, the human design, what eventually became the human design information. And that whole experience is on another YouTube where he actually narrates it, what he went through and what the experience was. And I highly recommend that for people to watch because it's quite incredible. Ra eventually, years after, was able to establish the structure of the human design system, and eventually have it presented in such a way where many people all over the world could access it and come to study with him and with the school, with Jovian Archive. And I believe it was in 2000, the late 2000s, that he passed. And so since then, we've had other manifestations of human design, and other people come out and start releasing information on it. And I'll leave it at that for now.
When
Anything
this
to that, Lauda?
when this event happened, I also wanted you to let everyone know your information, how to contact you for having their charts done. If they would like to, they would need a contact information.
Can
So
we leave
maybe
a link
at
below?
the very end we can do that
Okay.
as well.
All right, that sounds good.
What I was going to ask is, when this event occurred and Ra was able to survive it and download the information, what happened to the rest of the others who had been hit by the same energy?
So this Ra talked about in some of the early human design books. I mean, basically there was people all over the world that were affected by it. Some of them just completely fried. I mean, almost, he hinted at them having ended up in like mental institutions, and other people just like getting glimpses of things. But it sounded like a lot of people couldn't handle the energy streaming through their consciousness. But he was able to, though he describes the experience as something really
Horrid.
really horrible thing.
Yeah. What year was that again?
This was, hope I didn't say 86. This was 1987.
1987. Okay, yeah. Oh, I do remember that year.
I actually do too. Very significant year in my life too.
Wow. So he has a very complex chart. He has a very incredibly, it was almost, if you look at his chart, it seems like he was actually designed to do this, to bring this in. He was designed to endure and actually be able to thrive through things that were just the opposite. Nobody would have been able to do this.
Hmm.
So maybe we can look at his chart and start dissecting it and seeing what that looks like, and going into all of the aspects of Ra, because he is a very, in some ways, he's very mysterious. And I know a lot of people had a hard time with him because they couldn't understand him. They couldn't, there was a lot of frustration, and there was a lot of, as he talks about that himself, right? So, and you have this amazing ability to just go into people's charts and reveal what's already there in aspects. And the asteroids are fascinating for anybody that doesn't know about this. I'm not sure how many people know about that, and maybe you might want to talk a little bit about that, because most people, I think, they get stuck on just the astrology aspect or the one human design, but they don't see the asteroids. They don't see how all of this, yeah.
Okay. So I think what I'll do is give a little picture of each of the three sections I'm going to do. I'm going to analyze, and maybe a short minute on each, and then we'll start it.
Great.
The first thing I'll do is I'll look at it. We'll look at his human design chart, and I'll talk a little about his type. He is the rare type. He's a manifestor type. It's like 7 to 8% of humanity. And I'll talk a little about his profile and maybe some of his channels.
Okay.
And then I'll go into his astrology chart, maybe where some of the planets are the houses, maybe some of the aspects, some of the conjunctions and oppositions, and any noteworthy signifiers.
Mhm.
And then I'll bring up an asteroid chart. It'll be very chaotic though when you guys see it, because it's gonna be the birth chart, the horoscope chart,
Mhm.
and there's just going to be many asteroids throughout. It's not going to be easy to even delineate the sections of like the first house all the way to the 12th, but you'll see something. I'll focus in on it a little, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about some of the asteroids that were aspecting his north node, which will be significant. That's very significant in astrology. That's like the destiny part.
Mhm.
It's where the energy is always moving, for one to experience. And he has some significant asteroids close to his north node that I don't know that anyone's really looked at or analyzed, you know. And
Fascinating.
there's some other asteroids around his chart that may illuminate some things, some possible relationships he had with life and his experience here. I mean, we don't know, and we're not going to pretend to to know exactly, but we'll look at the chart, maybe how the chart was utilized and influenced. And he himself was very well versed in this stuff.
Mhm.
So you're going to have an example. Well, we have an example of a man who was living out his chart, and yet at the same time kind of moving with it and utilizing it, because he knew what was happening and when.
Right.
So we're talking about someone very aware. Okay, so let's start then. I'm going to share his, let me go to share. I'm going to share his
Do we
human
know
design.
what he was doing before he was struck with this? Like in life, do we know?
Yeah. He was in Ibiza, Spain,
Mhm.
and I think he was just living like a bohemian. I think he was just like living on the island, and
Wow.
he had a dog, and he was living in some small little, I don't know, I can't remember if it was a little hut or a little house, maybe a little house.
Mhm.
And he just describes one day walking in there alongside his dog, and the dog like passing out on the ground. I mean, this, this is like an incredible delineation. I won't say too much more, I'll leave the
Yeah.
mistake for those who want to read or hear him talk about it. And here's a man also, I should say, being a manifester, maybe maybe is noteworthy to this, because he was very prepared in life.
Mm.
He had a good education. He had a pretty, as far as I know, his upbringing was pretty solid. Although the chart does say that he was denied certain things, but maybe not material things. Maybe, as we discussed, more emotional maturity or things to that effect. But yeah, he was just, maybe he was, I don't remember how old he was at the time. He was born in like 48, I think. So maybe he would have, and that would have been 87. So maybe he would have been in his 40s.
Yeah.
And that can be quite terrible.
Wow.
But yeah, and so it happened in Spain at that time, and it was such an experience. I think it took him years just to get a handle on it, you know.
Yeah.
And there's the talk about how he got the information, wrote it all out, drew it all out, and then later burned it, thus even later deciding to recreate it, rewrite it, re-sketch it all. So it's a
Burning it
pretty,
in an attempt to try and burn it out of him because it was probably so much to handle.
oh yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, I imagine so.
But I mean, it's impossible when you have something like that occur because the energy of the event that happened to him would have been embedded in his cells, literally in his molecular structure. So there is no burning it out.
Yeah, right.
So
Which makes sense with him redoing it all after he attempted to, you know.
yeah.
Okay, so I'm gonna go ahead and I'm gonna share. I'll delineate a couple things to look for in this human design chart. So Ra being his type being a manifester means that he is a person who's able to manifest and not have to wait like all the other types have to wait for an invitation or response. But Ra is able to manifest almost at will, and it's because he has the splenic center activated, and it connects from the channel 5720 to the throat, which is the center of manifestation out into the world. And manifestors have this ability, this access to be able to manifest things into life very quickly, very powerfully. But they can get blocked by other people, especially when they don't um, let people know, that they're going to manifest. That's a big thing with manifestors. They don't like letting people know that they're going to do this or that because it feels to them like they're asking permission.
Can you explain the difference between a manifestor and a manifesting generator? Because I'm sure a lot of people will want to know what the difference is.
Kind of a literal difference in the sense that manifesting generators are half manifestor and half generator, so they have kind of both qualities. But ultimately they're a generator, so they have to wait in order to respond to what the world brings them. But the manifesting part of the manifesting generator is always impatient to manifest. But once something is brought to them and they can respond to it in a positive way, or in a way where they're agreeing to manifest, instead of grounding it out, they will bring it to manifestation, and they'll be quick and they'll act just like a manifester, and they'll immediately manifest it into reality. And usually they have a channel to the throat. So usually it's the 34 to the 20. Those are the pure manifestors. And other times it could be one of these other channels, even like Ra has. It's just that they always have the sacral center defined. And so they have to process their energy through the sacral. Where the non-sacral types, like projectors and reflectors and manifestors, they don't have to process through the sacral.
Okay.
So they're always a little quicker.
Right.
It takes time to process energy through the sacral. Generators and manifesting generators, they always pull the energy that's brought to them. They have to either ground it out, as if it's a no, they're not going to manifest in response,
Right.
or take that energy and manifest it into the world.
Okay. That makes sense.
Yeah, did I answer that? Yeah. And so in Ra's chart, I'm going to talk a little about the channels. I'm not going to go over all of them, but I'm going to say that Ra had two, let's see, two, three. He actually has 4 active channels in his chart. He has the 5720, the 1020, and the 1057, actually 5, sorry, and the 1057. And then he has the 2551 and the 2343. I like to think of the 2343, even though it can be common, but especially the 2551 is some of the most powerful channels in the human design chart. The 2343 is unconscious, it's red. Anything red in the chart, just pure red, is unconscious. It's the design part of the genetics. So it's, you could look at it either in the Eastern parlance as our past lives, or you could look at it in the Western as our genetics.
Right.
And in Ra's case, he has an unconscious 4323, which is the channel of genius freak. So a freak when he just tells people that he told people things without being, without them asking, and then they don't understand what he's talking about. And then the genius part when people ask questions, people want to know things, and he's able to hear that, have that knowingness, that great knowingness, and bring it forth. It's a very powerful channel. And then the 2551, that's very powerful because that's the channel of, well, actually, gate 51 is the gate of shock, but it's a mystical channel in itself. So it's capable of experiencing great shock, and it's capable of transformation, mystical transformation, almost like a priest or a priestess. It has the power to take people and bring them across, kind of across the bridge from life to death, in a way.
Yeah,
And
death to life, right.
yeah, it's a very powerful channel. And
Which
so,
is what he went through.
oh yeah, I mean, that's that channel right there. He was extremely shocked, that whole experience. And the 51 is a form of shock, and depending on the line is how he would have dealt with that shock, but I'm not going to go into such details. He had 5th line, uh, and so yeah, so those are the 2 really powerful channels. He also has the 5720 and the other ones I went over. The 1020 is very integrous. The 1020 is very powerful. Those are the type people that have to call people out on their shit, no matter what. They will just call people out. They say things as they are. They don't hold back,
Yeah.
And I think, if I remember correctly, in the community, people had some trouble with that. I mean, he had a really dark sense of humor, from what I know, from what I heard. And, he wasn't always, also being an Aries moon and an Aries, basically a double Aries, he wasn't always the most, soft, loving type energy. It's more of a tough love,
You
more
just
of,
said it as it is.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Which I absolutely love about
Yes. And the 57 is usually it's a channel, a gate of intuition. And with the 20 and with the 10, that also speaks its mind when it needs to. The 10 is interesting. That's self behavior. That's his behavior. That's a rule gate. And let me see what line it's in. He has it in the first line. So his behavior, how he acted with people, that's going to be interesting, because first line is going to be adaption, I think. So he's going to be someone who is going to have to really, I would say that part of his journey was to learn to love himself. That's a love gate. The 10 is a love gate right there.
Yeah.
And the completion of that is in the 57, the 20, the 34. And so definitely there's going to be some experience of needing to learn to love oneself. And if you see the red and black gates there, the 48, the 12, and the 7, do you see
Yes.
those?
Yes.
So when it's red and black, those are called overlays. And it means that it's both conscious and subconscious. So it's the more overlays someone has, the more able they are to see what is occurring self-reflexively, so they can see themselves at the same time as they're doing things. And in his chart, he has 3, which is not a huge amount, but he was very aware, without a doubt. And all the colored centers, the middle square and the other triangles and squares that are colored, those are definitions that he had in this chart his whole lifetime. The transiting planets would have affected the centers that are white. Um, those centers would have been affected by transits, and those would have affected him.
So he would have been vulnerable in those areas, and each of those areas are specific to certain characteristics.
Characteristics and organs of the body.
Right.
It's where we're conditioned by the outside. It's where the world comes in.
So all of his areas that are not colored, what are each of those? What are the vulnerabilities of each of those? Just like briefly.
Sure. The root center, that would be at the bottom, the middle square. That would have been pressure from the outside world.
Mm-hmm.
The one right above that is the sacral center. He would have not been in control of the energy around him. Usually the sacral energy would control how much energy he has, or how much energy is in the experience around him and with him.
Right.
The one to the right, the solar plexus center, that triangle there, that would have been the emotional wave. So he would have been subject to the conditioning of the emotional wave, and that one's the most powerful center in human design.
Right.
That one is the emotional wave, and those of us who are open, and I'm open, so I know the experience is that if we react to the energy flowing through us, then we can over amplify the energy and really affect our health. But if we just allow the energy to flow through and not react to it, then it's a more healthy response. And that goes for all the centers.
Yeah.
The triangle on the top, the very top, the head center, that center there is responsible for in kind of inspiration, the thoughts of others, being inspired by certain things. So he would have been the type who might have been inspired in environments, and then he would have went home or departed from the group or the area, and it would have slipped out, like, I don't know, I'm not sure what I was so inspired about. He wouldn't have been able to retain that.
Okay.
Because it's a conditioned center. So all these open centers, they're not open centers, but all these white centers are all places where we get conditioned by the outside world to respond in certain ways until we can work through the energy, and just allow it to flow through. But that's a challenge, it's a big challenge.
So can you explain also now the colored areas and what each of those colors mean with regards to not just the color, but is there anything unique and different from the green versus the yellow versus the brown versus the red?
There may be, but Ra never remembered.
Oh,
He
okay.
didn't retain that information. I think he noted that there was significance to the colors, but it's not something he retained.
Interesting.
So
Okay.
it's not something we know.
Although the red, because of where that is, that would be related to rage, anger, the ability to deal with how you respond.
I'll say this: the solar plexus and that small red triangle, the ego center, are the two most difficult terrains where human relationships struggle. Because when you're interacting with others, and let's say you're an open solar plexus and the other person's defined,
Right.
then that's where the conflict may arise in its most extreme way.
Mhm.
And the same with the ego center, because those who are open in the ego center, they're not very egoic people, but the ego has a strong effect on them. And
Mhm.
so people with a defined ego like Ra,
Mhm.
he's going to have a very strong ego.
Mhm.
And as Ra noted in his I Ching of human design, the ego is a very ugly thing once it kind of rears its head. But its place is to present itself and withdraw. It's not something that's always there.
Right.
But in human design relationships, people that are open are very sensitive to that kind of ego energy. And
Mhm.
so they could be put off when a defined ego person makes this claim or says this in such a way. There could be there could be conflict. There could be around that. I
Mhm.
mean, that's usually the experience. Those are the two most difficult centers to negotiate in human relationships.
Is there a positive aspect to it being red?
Um, Willpower.
Yep.
It's the center of willpower.
Yeah.
So those who have it defined have consistent willpower.
Yeah.
They can will things without too much pressure, on the heart. But
Mhm.
those who have it open, um, if they attempt to utilize willpower and if they're not having a transit there, then it could cause harm to their organs, to their heart, it could cause pressure, you know,
Right.
to the, so it can be difficult.
Mhm. And the other areas that are colored?
He's a defined spleen, so he would have generally always felt okay in his body, decently well. He didn't necessarily feel everything that was happening within his body,
Mhm.
although his experience of the supernova, and the neutrinos, that gave him that 7-8 day experience. He definitely communicated that he felt a lot of things.
Yeah.
But usually people with that center, um, I'll say this, and especially in foreshadowing of the later discussion of maybe how he passed, that usually people with a defined spleen center,
Mhm.
they suddenly they'll develop, sickness, or they can things come on suddenly, it feels like, for them, because they don't always have an intuition. They have an intuition, but they don't always hear their own intuition as to when they might get sick or something may happen. Whereas those with an open spleen usually know exactly what's happening in their body and have a lot of forewarning before they get sick.
Mhm.
But in Ra's case, he could have suffered things suddenly.
Yeah.
Sickness would have been sudden. Even death can come suddenly, with those with a defined spleen.
Right.
Whereas with an open spleen, the death sometimes is usually slower. You could see and kind of feel yourself progressing,
Yeah.
to such stages.
Mhm.
I'll go over the 48. That's an overlay that he has. That's right there in the spleen. He was someone with a lot of depth, you know, and someone with the 60, no, with the 16 above would have been able to pull out that depth, kind of find and pull it out. In the world, of course, the transits would have pulled that great depth out as well. And
So would you say that his personality was in conflict between being a hermit or being very self-isolating, and also the extreme opposite of that, where he had to be in the limelight, he had to be uh, so it was just a conflict of two oppositions all the time.
it's the story of a manifestor's life. I
Yeah.
mean, manifestors, they need their time to withdraw
Mhm.
and then their time to come back and
Yeah.
share with the world. And then they need their time to withdraw. They need a lot of alone time. They're often hermits, but they do need their time to come back to share, their knowledge and such. And going over his profile, he had a 5-1, as you guys see in the top, his sun and his earth. His sun sits in the fifth gate at his birth, and in the design side, it's the first gate. So his profile in human design, they say 5-1. So he was a natural leader, you
Mhm.
know. Uh, Also being Aries, that's another perfect fit, right? An Aries 5-1, and as a manifester. Manifestors are natural leaders as well. There's enough evidence for a dominant theme here of being someone who's a great innovator, great leader, great initiator of knowledge at this time in our humanity.
Mm-hmm. Great. Shall we look at his other chart?
Yeah, let's go to his astrology chart.
So he was born in Montreal, Quebec, Canada, right?
Yeah, that's correct. You caught that there. Is that good there? It doesn't look too
A little
good.
larger for people, because if you can, that would be.
Just give me a second. This is from Astro.com, by the way, but it's also fairly available if you Google Ra Uru Hu's chart. So here's his astrology chart. We have him at April 9th. That's Tuesday, by the way. That's in a couple of days.
Ah, yes.
And so April 1948 at midnight, 5 minutes after midnight in Montreal, Canada. And if we look at his chart, the first thing that stands out to me, especially when I first looked at his chart, is I was looking at the elements. And he looks to be all fire and air. There's no grounding in his chart, and there's no emotional kind of depth in his either. There's no real water in his chart. Maybe his Chiron. I don't know how much I'd count that. Except for his nodes, his nodes, and we'll get to the nodes. I want to talk about that a little later. But otherwise, he's all air and fire, so extremely, just quick fire, just extremely powerful manifester, just quick and shattering illusions, of the past. This is someone whose knowledge, whose presence is really formidable and powerful.
Also, sorry, can I just say that with what I see, the air would feed the fire. So whatever he would be experiencing, he wouldn't be able to really necessarily control, but it would overcome him and it would become like a storm of storms. So the level of inability to stabilize, it also would be represented in the way that he would physically be living.
Oh yeah, this is someone who has a hard time possibly grounding himself in reality and finding a place to really call home and stay there.
Yeah.
I'd look at his fourth house for more evidence on that. His north node in the fourth house, so his destiny would have been in some sense to create a home, create a family.
Yeah.
And he did at the end of his life. He did, for sure.
Yeah.
But yeah, this is it's a real challenge to ground when you don't have earth, in your chart,
Or even water.
or even water, right?
Yeah.
And so this is a guy who probably had been all over the world, big traveler, and then you look deeper into his chart. He does have some powerful planets in a water house, which is the eighth house. So it's not the same as having water signs in your chart, but he does have Mars, Saturn, and Pluto and Leo in the eighth house. So in terms of having that intuitive, transformational, psychic aspect of a mage. It's there because of all those planets in the eighth house.
Yeah.
The eighth house being kind of our secret powers, what our real powers are, and those are all the malefics too. Mars, Saturn, and Pluto all together. That would have been the part in the house, like you were saying. That would have been the part where the fire would have erupted when it did. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah.
That would have been like that part, that wiring part of the house that would catch fire. Whenever he went ablaze.
Absolutely.
The spark that kind of lit it up.
It's fascinating that the majority of all his aspects are in the third, in the eighth, and the 11th for the most
Third, Neptune in the 11th.
part.
Neptune
Right.
in the 11th is interesting because that rules groups. And, human design was a big structure he created, and it was a big, huge group. So maybe on some level there could have been some disillusionment in some ways, I mean, it was an experience. He was growing from that experience.
Yeah.
And yeah,
Well,
because, go ahead.
isn't the 11th house also with relationships to the process of death, or having, in one way or another, being confronted with death?
Oh, I'm sorry, I read that wrong. It's ninth house. It's Neptune in the ninth. Because
Neptune,
the
yeah,
11th was as Chiron is there, the
right.
wounding with the groups and stuff.
So,
But death is eighth house.
but is it not, does it not have a relationship with the 11th Chiron?
Uh,
See what I'm saying? Like, it plays off of each other? Because,
yes, because Chiron is in Scorpio 23 degrees, and it's going to be square. It's going to be squaring his Mars, Saturn,
yeah.
and Pluto and Leo. It's not exact, but it's within degree. I mean, let's see what I counted it. Let's see, 50. Let me make sure I have. It's so hard to see the numbers on that chart, but I wrote it out here. I just want to be sure. It's an orb. Okay, so Mars I have at 18, Saturn at 15, and Pluto at 12. So Mars is going to be closest to the Chiron. So that's a Mars square Chiron. And Saturn, it would be 8 degrees. I'd still count that. And Pluto at 12 degrees, that would be 8 plus 3. That'd be 11. That's a little, we'd be reaching a little for that one, but it is square, those malefics, at least two of them. And so that would have, if that would have caught fire there, yes, it would have affected his deepest wound.
Mm-hmm.
He would have definitely got lit up on his deepest wounds. That would have triggered a whole geometric sequence of events that would have probably came up in his life at times whenever that was triggered.
Yeah.
And there's, I think, another square to Taurus on the other side. Taurus's north node is 15 degrees. So that's going to be square his Mars exactly, if I'm reading that correctly. Or square his Saturn exactly, sorry. Squaring his Saturn. So yeah, that
See,
part makes, go ahead.
that's a double, that's a double complication, because it would have even been a greater challenge. So what aspects he would have to try and have any kind of grounding, that would have been an opposite force in his life, in
And
the
he,
very aspects that he's strong in. Do you know what I mean? Like that.
oh yeah, right. Like in other words, he has to overcome the challenge
Yeah.
of Mars in his eighth house, which would be his appetites, his drive. He'd have to learn the lesson of not running over others, right? Or experiences or dominating. That would have been the challenge there. With Pluto there, the challenge would have been fear of living, fear of death, um, embracing that fear, getting through that fear.
Yeah.
Saturn would have been a slow burn, to create the structure that he did. So I would say Saturn was a success for sure.
Mhm.
Him having created human design system, and yeah, it's just, I mean, this is someone very extraordinary to
Mhm.
have Mars, Saturn, and Pluto in the eighth house. This is a very extraordinary capacity to manifest, into this plane.
And also to just be able to hold those energies on a day-to-day basis, even just looking at that.
Wow, yeah, I think you said I mean, just being able to negotiate the day to day. I
Yeah.
mean, all the manifestors that I've known, it's a struggle to balance out their experience in the world, because there is that negotiation between time for themselves and then when it's correct to bring themselves back into the world. A lot of extremes, a lot of extreme transitions.
So do you think when he brought this out for the world, do you think that he was able, in his current circumstances at the time, to really deliver this the way that he was supposed to? Or do you think that he ended up being able to deliver it in the only way he was able to, which sort of shortcutted himself?
I know what you're.
You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
it was supposed to it was supposed to be different in the sense of how it was um, accepted, as opposed to being something that remained kind of an obscure thing that only a few people would know about.
It's the way you're posing it is there's so much there to unpack, because the consequences of it are how is something born
Yeah.
into our density of
Consciousness.
consciousness. How is it born out? How do we even attempt to
And would that have,
affirm
right, and would that have been
qualifiers?
part of his frustration? Would that have been part of what he struggled and fought against? Because it's almost like it's what they say, that a prophet is never known in their own hometown
Huh? Or in their own time.
or in their own time.
Yeah, I mean, with Saturn there in the eighth, it was definitely, and he talks about it. I mean, from what I've read of his writings, he talks about the process, how slow it was, how many years it took him to just process that information initially. And the years between 87 and maybe 93, 94, when human design started to gain footing in the world, was starting to really, books were starting to appear, and he was actually starting to start publishing his work,
Yeah.
his information on it. It's a hard thing to know. I mean, where we're at now,
Mhm.
to this day, mostly what I get in response from people when I ask them if they know their human design type or they've heard of human design is it varies, but I'm in an area where, there's a lot of people that are exposed to this. So yeah, I do meet people that are, oh yeah, I know about that, or I know my type. But as far as people that are not into exploring, or people that they're living their day-to-day lives, and families, or through work mostly, they're not they don't know about this stuff.
Yeah.
So it's really hard to gauge. I mean, is it mainstream? I would say no, for sure.
Mhm.
Astrology is obviously mainstream, but it's also, astrology is like mainstream in the sense that everyone knows it's some kind of charlatan's design. You know what I mean? It's mainstream
Well,
in that sense.
what about the 13th moon in astrology that doesn't seem to be anywhere?
Huh? What do you mean by the 13th moon?
Well, yeah, there's in ancient astrology, there was something that was called a 13th moon, or you could say 13th house,
Huh? No, I don't.
a 13th sign.
This. I'm not too. I read some stuff upon that, but yeah, I don't know.
Because I'm wondering if you compare human design to astrology, and how, I mean, both are essentially blueprints of our cosmic design.
Okay.
So both of them would be, in essence, the same thing, only different methodologies, different aspects. So
I've heard it. Okay.
you've heard it.
I've heard it expressed as astrology showing the expression of our being,
Yeah.
whereas human design is showing the functionality.
Okay, brilliant. I think that helps people.
but at the same time, human design incorporates the
Mhm.
I Ching, Kabbalah, astrology in itself, as well as overlaid
Yeah.
with the genetic chart. And so human design is a synthesis of like the ancient systems and some modern scientific models, whereas astrology is kind of like really, really ancient system that we have brought down through many different cultures, and views and perspectives. So the ability to oversee all the possibilities or all the developments of astrology is very, very difficult. I mean, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Someone
Totally.
would have to be someone would have to live a life of like 8,000 years to like study all the astrology that has existed. Whereas human design it's already a synthesis. It's already structured in such a way that you could learn it. However, as since Ra has died, there's definitely levels, and there's definitely more there to just just the basic description I gave on the human design chart. I mean, there's much more there beneath. You
Mhm.
know, there's other aspects that come out all the time, and even some of Ra's lectures are now coming out that didn't come out. Hadn't been heard before. You know,
Okay. Can we look at his fourth house for a minute? And
sure.
can you talk a little bit about that?
So in the fourth house is this North Node in Taurus. So, oh yeah, I was gonna get to that. That's right. So all the planets, both personal and outer planets, as I discussed, it's all as we were talking about. It's all air and fire. But his North and South Node are Earth and water. So he comes from a Scorpio South Node and a Taurus North Node. So he would have been someone who just was like a natural psychic, a natural mage, just came from that space of having high intuitive grasp of things. And with the North Node in Taurus, he would have been someone who's in this lifetime learning to be practical, learning to ground, to create a structure for himself, not just for the world around him, as Saturn in the eighth kind of describes, but for himself to ground into the world, to be fully present
Mhm.
and to create something, a home for himself,
Mhm.
you know. And that would have been the struggle. Usually with the Scorpio South Node, there would have been a lot of chaos in the youth,
Right.
a lot of chaos, a lot of transformation. There might have even been an addiction, to
Yeah.
that type of of just struggle and turmoil and suffering, although those are qualifications of transformation,
Yeah.
that may have been how they were experienced initially. And but ultimately, like, the whole death and rebirth of the phoenix, of the Scorpio kind of symbolism,
Yeah.
right? So it's usually very intense for anyone with a Scorpio South Node. So a big struggle. That's probably his biggest struggle, being his North Node destiny,
Yeah.
was to live that out, to create that home for himself.
Do you know what led him to Ibiza?
He might have mentioned it in the description in one of the early human design manuals that I had read, but
Mhm.
I don't recall or retain that right now.
Yeah.
I think he really loved the community there. I think
Mhm.
he really enjoyed it. The bohemian kind of. I
Mhm.
don't know if he was much of a partier. I know it's known as a party island,
Ibiza is completely a party island. Yeah. It's a beautiful island. Absolutely. A lot of fun. Um, I think it would have been impossible for him to remain where he was born. I think when I see his chart and I see the dynamics, it's like you said, he was very bohemian. He would not also the aspect of the prophet that's not accepted in his hometown again, right? That he would have to
Yeah,
go
yeah, right.
somewhere
That's a nice myth to recall for
else
this. Sure.
and create and
Yep.
manifest what he needed to.
And in Ibiza, it's where, when the event happened, when the supernova occurred, he describes it as, I don't want to get this wrong, but he describes the event as in terms of the human design cosmology. So neutrinos and design crystals, and I'm not retaining all that right now, so I don't want to, but he does talk about it was specific to where he was on the planet. So
Okay.
where exactly he was, right? That the little house he had.
Okay.
It,
Oh, okay.
like as if like in that area where he was, there was an accumulation of neutrinos or design crystals, something that sparked him because he was there in that area.
Right.
Now, it doesn't mean that anyone who was living there would have took that information and have been fine.
Mm-hmm.
I'm already had the chart of someone who is capable of incredible transformation, incredible someone who could have took it in that energy as he did
Mm-hmm.
and made it what it was, and been able to channel it through, and to bring it forward into our consciousness.
Brilliant wisdom. Brilliant wisdom when he speaks. I have to say that his ability to see through things in such a way that he wasn't feeding the illusion at all. He has perceptions that you just don't even hear of. You don't even hear people even discussing anything close because most people are reacting to the illusion.
Huh.
It's fascinating, and for the little that I've, what I have seen of him, his his ability almost to cut through the nature of reality and illusions, to be able to not react to the ego, which is it's a funny thing because he was reacting to ego the whole time but not reacting to ego, if you know what I mean. So he was able to foresee and see things that were outside the realm of the ego, but at the same time his challenge was the ego.
Yeah, as any ego definition person may say. Uh,
It's fascinating.
I agree with you. His tone, his frequency, the cadence of how he spoke. Every time I listen to him, it's almost like I'm being reset vibrationally,
Yeah.
because how he begins to describe something, he's coming from a direction I don't know, and it takes me just almost like a minute or two just to establish myself in the
Right.
context of what he's saying,
It's
and then
brilliant.
and then I'm already in this other space where
Mhm.
I'm getting this information in this other
Well,
way.
exactly, and it's like you said also, it's no bullshit. There's no softening the blow.
No, and this is what could have endeared him to so many people, you know in the sense that he was a shocking individual.
Yeah.
He was here to shock. And I didn't mention that his channels were mostly individual channels. The 4323 is individual, the 5125, all three of his channels are individual. So this is a real individual. This is someone who's not going to do things like everyone else. He's going to do things his own way. And that's going to step on a lot of people's feet. He's not taking certain things into consideration. I mean, he's not that type of being. He's not here to do that. His speaking in itself is already cutting, as you described, is already cutting through bullshit.
Yeah.
And so if you're not on that plane of understand what's being cut through,
Yeah.
you'll personalize it, and then may take what he's saying in a different way,
Mm-hmm.
which could bespeak and underscore a lot of the recoil he had, I think,
Mm-hmm.
in his community. And I mean, I don't really know. I wasn't necessarily in the community, but I've known human design practitioners who've known him, and I've heard through the community this and that. And like anyone else, like any person who begins something on such a large scale, there's going to be tension. Not everyone's going to agree, or want to hear things in such a way.
Well, the interesting thing also about his chart, from what I see, is that there is a difference between his non-bullshit, which I absolutely love, because he doesn't when you're coming from an aspect of truth, you don't need to justify or soften the blow or anything. You're just going to speak the truth. That's it. It's irrelevant whether people like it or not. If they don't like it and they're sensitive to it, then it's not your issue anyway. This is hitting on something that they have to deal with. Chances are. But there is a difference between that and being abusive. So it can come across, because he's so forthright and he is coming from the standpoint of having a personality and an ego and knowing exactly who he is and what he's come in to do and say and be. And he doesn't need to pussyfoot around anybody. And then there is a difference between thinking that you're just being honest, but actually being just mean and cruel. And I think right. And I think there has to be made that distinction, because one is just honesty, and it isn't really aiming to hurt anybody. It's just stating things as they are in such a way that it isn't personalization. It's just, this is the way things are. Like, whether you can see it or, there was no pinpointing anything when he speaks. It's just facts. Hard facts, but facts. And then there would be, the other angle of it would be abusiveness, which is a whole different aspect. So,
do you mean abusiveness in the sense of, I mean, one thing, and we'll see the asteroids as we overlay that on top of this chart, will underscore triggered reactiveness in his chart,
right.
that could manifest as, I mean, looking at that eighth house, looking at that Mars, right, Saturn, and Pluto, and adding asteroids into the mix, there's going to be, as we discussed and as we're going to look at soon, that's going to be underscored with certain asteroid placements.
Right, and so a blurry line, a potentially blurry line where that part of him that is just truthfully critical or truthfully just truthful can overstep the boundaries when imploded by his fire and air.
Yeah, I mean.
And by the aspects in his chart that are overpoweringly emotional, where he was mostly groomed intellectually, so perhaps he wasn't really designed to respond emotionally. So there's, we can look at the two aspects in his chart that would create those two dichotomies completely. One in a personal way, one in his personal life, and then one in just the way he communicates the truth.
Yeah, in his chart, I would say, people with water moons beware, because fire and water create steam, and a lot of conflict. So people with a lot of water in their charts are not going to, get along necessarily.
Yeah.
It's very difficult for water and fire to be able to navigate together, communicate together.
And what's his relationship aspect in his chart? Maybe discuss that a little bit. His personal relationships.
That would be seventh house.
Mm-hmm. People are always fascinated by knowing how to interpret their personal relationships in terms of the aspects astrologically. So it's kind of a, it's a part of how we filter all the information and then how we interact cosmically with one another, because this is like cosmic bodies interacting with other cosmic bodies, right? All of this is what astrology is. This is what human design is. This is what everything is that we're experiencing. So it's just like the celestial wars, right? Like the cosmic wars. So you want to maybe discuss how his chart is aspected?
Let me go to the asteroids before I do that. Or I'll do that with the asteroids. Okay. It'll shed further light on that.
So, I noticed that he's got Mercury in 0 degrees in Aries.
So yeah, anytime there's a planet in 0 degrees, if I remember correctly, it can act as the sign before or the sign that it's moving towards.
Right.
And It's very powerful. Yeah, it is very. Any 0 degree planet is very powerful, and it is a personal
Hmm.
planet in this case. And it's Mercury in Aries. You
Yeah.
know, very sharp, very quick,
Hmm.
very cutting. Right. I mean, this is not someone who's worried about how he's going to sound. You know, I mean, there is that dichotomy with Aries in terms of being bold and being timid. There's that dichotomy, but I mean, all first 3 planets are in Aries, and then Venus and Gemini, Mars and Leo. It
Yeah.
all just it all flows in this chart. I mean, there's no stopping and waiting, you know, for water, for Earth, you know.
The
It's
Jupiter in Sagittarius is interesting because that would also be a part of his adventurousness, and but it's a conflict because as much as he's adventurous and he needs to experience new things in a very self-directed way, if there would be opposition in that itself. So he's opposite to himself in his own nature, if you know what I mean.
well said. I mean, you just really encapsulated an opposition in this chart right there on his ascendant. So on his ascendant is Jupiter in Sag,
Mhm.
and it's almost directly opposing Uranus. Oh wow. So he has Uranus almost exact opposition at his birth. The ascendant being his birth, right?
Yeah.
That is, God, I wonder how he was born. I wonder if it was not some kind of shock. I wonder if he wasn't born maybe C-section or something like that, because that's a huge shock. You know, and we know what the 51 is capable of shock, but I wonder, that's curious.
Hmm. Or even maybe a stillbirth or almost like a, yeah.
Yeah, I would love to know. I would wonder about that. You're
Mhm.
honest.
Because it's like he came in with death and life.
Right? I mean, Jupiter ever expanding, and Uranus is a big shock wave
Yeah.
to the birth. You know, it's wow, I know that aspect well.
Yeah.
And but Jupiter in the ascendant is usually you know, very nice, you know, meaning to say Jupiter is very expansive, very positive, very joyful. It would have maybe that would have been part of maybe why he had an upbringing where he had everything he needed, perhaps, you know, in terms of material gain, but maybe not in terms of emotion, you know, emotional mature development.
Yeah.
But yeah, that Uranus, I think good catch. You described it almost exactly.
Hmm.
You know, there is a contrast there, a contradiction
Hmm.
in his birth. Wow. I
Yeah.
didn't catch that one.
It's fascinating.
Anything else before we go to the asteroids?
Let's go to the asteroids and then maybe pop back here after the asteroids so that we can, yeah.
Okay. So here are the asteroids. This is going to be very seemingly chaotic for most of the viewers. I apologize about that. These are just how the asteroid charts kind of come up on serenu.com. And as you can see, there's names of a lot of asteroids. I don't generally attempt to interpret all 2, 3, 400, 5, you know, thousands of them. There are main ones I look for, of course, and if I see, and sometimes I'll study new ones if I see them in significant places in a chart.
There's
The
different
first,
colors.
yeah, they're all varied
Does that mean
colors.
anything? No?
It does.
Yeah.
The greens are the Uranian planets, if I remember correctly. Uh, and the rest have meaning as well. I just can't remember, but I know for sure that the greens are all the Uranian planets, if I remember correctly.
Okay.
The red are going to be the planets, the normal planets that we're used to, moon, sun. Um, I think. No, I'm not going to attempt
Yeah.
to to validate that. I'm not sure.
So these are all the asteroids that were in his universe at the time of his birth.
Yes, yes. This is where they were in his chart.
Hmm.
So when I look at the asteroids in someone's chart, the first thing I look at is a north node, because it's the magnetic north. It's a direction where someone is going in their life, and it's the energy they will constantly deal with.
Mm-hmm.
So getting back to your question on relationships with others,
Mm-hmm.
that's also one of the first things I look at. So if Ra met somebody and let's say they had Mars on his north node. His north node was in Taurus, so he has a 15-degree north node.
Mm-hmm.
So that would have been, so if someone had a 15-degree Mars on his north node, then someone who's aware, if he was aware of such, he would have said, okay, this person's gonna bring me a lot of their drive or conflict or tension. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
They're gonna bring a lot of Martian energy to his life, because that's a vulnerable point in the chart. So wherever your north node is, if someone else has something there, you're exposed to that. You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah.
You can't kind of block it out. It's very difficult. It's your north node energy. It's where you're always going. So it's a very sensitive part of the chart. And in relationship, when I do a relationship analysis, it's the first thing I look at. You don't want to find malefics there. You don't really want to deal with Saturn or Pluto or Mars on someone's north node in synastry, because it can be too tough.
Mm-hmm.
Pluto might be okay, Pluto's transformation, but some of the others, and also some of the dark asteroids, like and they're here. I mean, Ra has Maniac, the asteroid Maniac, 13 degrees. That's 2 degrees from his north node.
Can you use your mouse and circle around where the asteroid is for people? Thanks.
So it's right here.
Yeah.
As you guys can see.
Yeah, and that's in the first house? Or no, that's which house is that?
And
Second or third? I
on
can't.
this chart, it's hard to tell on this chart, because it'll say his ascendant somewhere on here, where the ascendant is at, but
So that's either a second or a third house, right? That has to be significant.
no, because he's a Sag ascendant, remember?
Okay.
So his first house is going to be up here. So
Oh,
that's
right. Okay. All right. So, but whatever house the maniac is in.
oh, fourth house. He had Taurus, fourth
Okay.
house.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
So yeah, family house.
Mm-hmm.
So that was a good question. That's a good point. So if you guys look, you'll see Maniac is conjunct his north node. He's got Lilith about 8 degrees away. For asteroids, we only account, within 1 to 3 degrees. We don't really, there's not a larger orb
Right.
for asteroids, really. And I'm going to scroll down a little.
So if the maniac, let me just go back. If the maniac asteroid is on, it's in a significant, it's significant, isn't it?
It is.
So
oh, go ahead. Sorry.
is that like a propensity to, a little bit of madness? Because he himself admitted that.
Oh yeah, he had no problem,
Yeah, and actually
direct.
said everybody's mad, really, but which is true, in their own way. But the maniac, that
it's in astrology, the overarching definition for maniac is out of control behavior.
Yeah. Okay.
So he could have been triggered into really learning. I mean, part of his lesson would have been learning how to behave correctly. That makes sense.
Yeah. Not overreacting.
Right.
Yeah.
And for any manifestor, it's hard, because they struggle with anger, and overreacting is part and parcel of the fact that they usually have a lot of open centers.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a lot of room for overreactiveness, until they work through it, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so that's right there in his fourth house, right next to his north node. There was some other asteroids there, but I did several different asteroid charts, because I have on my subscription to the site, I have different lists of asteroids.
Right.
So I didn't necessarily put all certain types of asteroids together. And I think he had Typhoon there too, which is out of control life. and that could have been, I mean, he, that's already a theme in the chart with a
Yeah.
Scorpio South Node, with learning to have a controlled life, with the North Node in Taurus, learning to have a grounded life.
Yeah.
That's already a big thematic. And then Echo was there, I believe, if I'm correct. And Echo usually expresses a type of codependency.
Mm.
Those were some. Another big one, if I can go to his sun. His sun was in Aries, right? So over here is Aries. You guys see that? You see
Yeah.
that?
Yeah.
There's a lot of asteroids there. His moon is there, 15 degrees. His sun is at 19.
Mm-hmm.
And the asteroid Sedna is 22 degrees. Now, this was really interesting because Sedna in itself expresses betrayal. It's the asteroid that expresses betrayal. And betrayal by men specifically.
Interesting.
And who knows the qualifying context of these things. Again, I wasn't a part of his life. I don't, we don't know these things directly. But maybe there was some, I don't know if it started with the father. Sometimes it starts with the father, where there's a betrayal of the father to the son, especially it being in aspect to the son.
Mm-hmm.
It could have been his relationships with men could have been very difficult. They could have been marred by betrayals. In itself, what does betrayal even really mean? It sounds, when I look up, go ahead.
Well, I just think his energy would have been really difficult for men to handle because men in general, sorry, but they're very competitive and they want to always be dominant in some way. Like
Oh
they,
yeah, the whole alpha male thing.
it's
Yeah, of
yeah,
course.
and so anybody who comes in with authority, truthful authority and truthful knowledge, it's like you said, that people like followers, but a leader is tough to take, or somebody who's just firm and strong. So I would be able to imagine that his energy is so strong and his power center would destabilize men
Oh
and,
yeah,
and also destabilize women in a totally different way. Like,
yeah,
you know,
sure.
it would just be a very, very opposite way of the same energy, essentially, right? But for men, it
Yeah,
would be threatening.
yes, to all that, and I mean to underscore it to the next level. I mean, as we went over, there's so much evidence for a leadership archetype, for the alpha archetype with Ra. I mean, Sun and Moon and Aries, Mercury and Aries 5-1 profile, manifestor type, the eighth house, all those planets in the eighth, just a very powerful being. And I want to say
Yeah.
this. Go ahead.
No. Go
I
ahead.
want I want to say something before I forget.
Yeah.
Now, we did say that Ra's, he's all fire, he's all air, he's not the most fluffy
Hmm.
teddy bear, that there ever was. But I want to say that Moon in Aries is often highly misunderstood.
Hmm.
Moon and Aries are people that have such sensitive sensoriums
Hmm.
that when they take in information, they take it in so quickly. I mean, it hits the nervous system so powerfully that they come off as seeming to be reactors,
Yeah.
when in fact they're just so sensitive and they're taking things in so quickly that they're bringing that energy back out at the same time almost.
Hmm. Hmm.
And with Aries energy, it's responding to in such a quick way that that's why Aries rules the archetype of leadership, because it can make decisions in the moment quickly.
Yeah.
You know, it's very authoritative. It can react and respond quickly and very strategically.
Yeah.
It's the leadership archetype and role.
Hmm.
But I want to say Moon in Aries is very sensitive.
Hmm.
Some have argued that it's probably the most sensitive moon in the chart
Yeah.
because of that, because it takes everything in so quickly.
Yeah.
And so regardless of what we said about Ra being, very, very, very much like quickfire, he still was a very sensitive and aware being with that moon in Aries. I want to say.
Yeah, I absolutely 100% would say that his base level foundation would always be from being very sensitive. That is like
Yeah. So part
that
of it,
is the very first tier of his being.
yeah, when he speaks, you can hear
Mhm.
it, and you're just drawn to what he's saying. You just
Yeah.
feel what he's saying.
And what I see in his chart is that cosmologically, he would be and is uh he's a very high cosmic being.
So
So
share more about that, Lauda, because the insights that you revealed to me when we discussed this before, they were really profound, and in terms of who Ra, of what he's I mean, just what he was capable of being aware of. You seem to really had grasped that, in a sense, because he did take in all this information, and then he was here on the planet, in our, our human clown suit,
mhm,
walking around, dealing with this day-to-day phenomena, and at the same time, he had all this knowledge and all this experience that he had gone through, you know.
I think he came through the filter of the human manifested body to bring this here, which is a tall order, by the way, for any cosmic big being who doesn't have to come here. Like,
Would rather not.
this is really, it's not preferable, but I, and the thing is, most of these cosmic archetypes are all basically obscured and hidden, even though their signature is right there. So I've always said this, that I think all of them have been now manifested in the flesh here, every one of them. And this is, part of the mystery, because nobody can really pinpoint who is who, but we're all now in the flesh here for this final game, final phase, right? That
Yeah,
and this is, and he knew all about that.
yeah,
Just like those of us who've come in for this purpose, and we've all known this. So even though it may not be spoken in word, you can see the signature of the cosmic being in their chart, like it's everywhere.
very powerful chart.
Mm,
And very, very challenging chart in terms of what he was here to bring, and the challenge of being able to bring it forth.
yeah.
He went through a lot. He went through a lot.
Maybe go into a few other of his asteroids for people, just so that they can get an idea of like other aspects of how these asteroids work. He's got Lilith.
He has Lilith there on 23 degrees in Taurus, but it's an 8-degree orb from his north node, so I wouldn't really count it.
No.
Um,
Maybe tell us which ones you consider are significant.
he has Pluto conjunct Melop, which is sometimes corresponds to tragedy of some kind.
Mm-hmm.
And with Pluto, Mars, and Saturn in the eighth house, there's another theme of tragedy in there. I think it was Saturn and Mars, or Saturn and Pluto. So that could be a theme if I found more signatures of that in the chart. So far, those are two. He has Dejanira in the first house, conjunct his ascendant. I wrote down. I don't know if I can see that here. Oh yeah, Dejanira is 6 degrees. That's the victimhood asteroid, and that's 6 degrees, and that's his ascendant's 24. That's a little too far off. And his Dejanira is in the sign of. I can tell that might be the next sign. I can't tell in this chart. After Capricorn, that might be in Capricorn. So that actually might be a 7. No, let's see, 6 plus 6, 12-degree orb. So that might not count too much. He has Jupiter conjunct Pholos. The asteroid Pholos tends to blow things up.
Sorry.
So,
Landline. I'm one of the few with a landline.
it's awesome. It really is. So Pholos is an asteroid that tends to blow things up, blow things, and he has it conjunct Jupiter, which expands. So if we interpret that in terms of maybe if he had blow-ups of sorts or there was blow-ups in his life, they were big.
Yeah.
That makes sense. And that would have been Jupiter. I'd have to find where Jupiter is in this chart again. But oh yeah, it's on his ascendant.
Yeah.
So that would have been, yeah, that's close to his birth. So with Uranus opposing that, again, we're not privy to that information, but something in his birth, something like some big blow up occurred perhaps. I mean, him being born is definitely that, into this realm. Let's see what else. He has Chiron square Mars, which is quite painful, and which is attention to his own masculinity.
Mm-hmm.
Chiron squaring his greatest wound
Yeah.
in tension. An inner tension squares like an inner tension to his drive, to his masculinity.
So do you think there was an aspect to this that has to do with the mother?
I'm not seeing enough evidence for conflicts with the mother. With that, I would look at the moon.
Right.
Whatever's aspected to the moon.
Yeah.
I'm looking at his moon right now, 50 degrees, 15 Aries in opposition. Oh, look, I found it.
Okay.
In opposition, he has prey. He has the asteroid prey.
Yeah. See, I felt that energetic at
and
work.
then Neptune is there, 11 degrees. Dissolution, right? On some level, Neptune is either, pristine clarity through the spiritual world, or it's disillusion. We're not able to see clearly at all in the physical world.
Yeah.
And Pandora's box is not too far away, 16 degrees. Yeah, yep. You see that. You feel that. There's a lot there with them, I'm sure. There's oppositions there with these asteroids, Pandora, right? Pandora's like Pandora's box, something unexpected, right? Something out of control.
Well, I would see on both ends, right? He has aspects that have to do with his father and his mother in ways that leaves him, in essence, kind of like alone, right? So so he wasn't able to develop with that unity, because instead there were deficits on both sides that presented in these asteroids, which are showing that he, his core wound would be impinging on his sense of manhood, as well as coming from the energetic of what the father was supposed to stabilize in him and what the mother was supposed to nurture in him. It was like he didn't have that. He had intellectualism. He had, the ability to go to school and learn things, but not anything that he could bring together to balance that out and contradict the power of these asteroids that are wounding that core.
Yeah, I agree. And that Chiron is it's in Scorpio, and it's in the 11th house, which rules friendships.
Mm-hmm.
Even with friendship, he could have remained an outsider to a great effect. I mean, not difficulty with closeness with others on parental levels, on friendship levels, this is someone with the signature of being a great leader, and a great leader is not one you can't have many close to you. You need your space. You're not one of the the minions of the.
Also, there's an impatience when you're a great leader, right? There's just a natural impatience because you are going very quick. You are spinning at such a high rate.
Yes.
It's almost unbearable, like, to go through the routine. And so what's preferable is, you know, you need energy to explain things. You need energy to have to constantly go into everything, and you don't always want to do that. You'll do that when you are compelled to do that, but you don't want to have that as your norm.
I mean,
So
Ra would have known this struggle. I mean, he, as a manifester, he needs his group, his team, his community to give him the energy
yeah,
to impart what's correct and to fulfill his role.
yeah,
But part of his journey was becoming patient to that, respecting that energy.
yeah.
And it's a challenge for any manifester because as human design describes, a manifester can get done in an hour what it can take, a generator to do in a month. I
Right.
mean,
So how can a manifestor communicate with anybody else of what's in them and how they're like, it's not possible.
well said. God, that's so true. I can't put it any other way. From my observation, manifestors have a hard time communicating.
Yeah.
They really do. Unless they've really worked at it. And what I mean by that is they have a hard time communicating their authentic self.
Yeah.
Because that means they have to accept they're a manifester and
Yeah.
accept that position and what they need and how they need to communicate.
Yeah.
But they don't like that. I mean, often what you get is manifestor types, they just want to be like everyone else, the
Well,
default
I think,
position.
yeah, intimacy is the issue, right? I mean, in this chart, intimacy, that's his core wound. The ability to connect on an intimate level and have that trust. So,
Yeah, there's several markers for that in the chart.
yeah.
There's several markers for that. I mean, any leader is not going to be comfortable with intimacy, or it's not a part of the directive of being a leader. You know,
Yeah.
a leader's on his own island. You know, he just wants to hear about. He wants to build his strategy, give his orders, and then wait for the response of how it turned out.
Yeah. Or she, yes.
For sure, yeah. Yeah. But there was struggle in the community. I mean, there was some of his core people went out to create their own systems.
So
And
that you're saying that some of his core people that started out and learned everything from him
yes.
tried to take the information and create something on their own that was not his original.
No, no, no. They did it with respect,
Yeah.
and
Okay. All right.
they did it with respect, and they did it, in their turn, in development of their own, kind of
So they
direction.
just carried it forward.
They carried it forward in their own way,
Mm-hmm.
which is correct too. But
Yeah.
I don't, that's still tough, for anyone who I'm sure that was still tough for Ra,
Yeah.
because he's creating his community. What is his expectation? I mean, I don't know, but
Yeah.
when you create a community and you teach core members the knowledge, what if they decide to go create their own system outside of that? It's kind of like a father or mother coming to terms with their child becoming an adult
Right.
and going out into the world
Yeah.
and it no longer belonging to them. Well, guess what? It never belonged to you to begin with.
Right.
You never owned your child,
No. No, and that's the illusion here. Everybody thinks that they own their family, their children, it's not true at all. I mean, we all need to come in here biased somehow. So we select what we need to, and we
Yeah.
do that. It doesn't mean, yeah, that's yours. There is no yours, and that's part of the illusion.
So Ra just dealt with the struggles anyone who built an empire would deal with. You know what I mean?
Yeah, fascinating, very strong, fascinating man who is like a very high cosmic being, no doubt about it, who struggled with the aspects of being in the flesh and what it is to be in the flesh here, which is the most challenging thing going.
Yeah.
And for any cosmic being, if you have to come into this filter, it's really, wow. you you have the greatest challenge of all. So how do you bring in the cosmos through the fragility yet the resiliency of the body in matter? And then your body in matter is learning how to be here with other bodies. Like everybody, I feel, is in the process of remembering, not it's a complete disconnect in some ways, right? And there has been a devolution. So when you have somebody like this, they're significant because they are not devolved. And unfortunately, in the process of our experience in matter, we have gone through a process of devolution. And that is, and that's also, I think, what contributes to, his chart where there's so much frustration, right? Because maybe perhaps a few thousand years ago, well, you can't even use time in history because that's a fallacy, but let's just say at the beginning of our manifested state, all of this would be received completely, and you wouldn't have to deal with people's inability to remember or their ego, if you know what I mean. But having to come in at this point, at this juncture, is critical, and it's also really challenging because of the nature of the coma, I guess you could say, the state of not remembering, the state of people having to struggle and fight to remember. So when you look at all of this information, right, this is all inside us. This is all what's in us. It's not what's out there. It's what's out there is what's in us and what is us.
Of course, the planets are not moving in some out there, they're moving within us.
Right.
These circling planets, these circling lights.
Right.
You know, that you bring to mind for me the fact that he became a presence in terms of building this structure and presenting to us this system. And at the same time, from what I've heard with people who, with human design teachers who I've spoken with and who've talked to him, there was always a hint of other knowledge, of otherness, of some kind of, he understood levels of awareness that human design does not touch upon in its clinical presentation, if that makes some sense, and because of that, I mean, I don't know, I think you have a better grasp and a better sense of it, but he was aware of way more than he was letting on.
Absolutely.
The only hint of it that I could get was when he talked about the future, when he talked about the transformation of Gate 55, when he talked about the rave coming in 2026, if I'm correct. And still that sounds all very abstract to me, but he was aware of, I mean, a lot from what I can imagine, but I think you have a better grasp of this.
Yeah, he was like, he was aware of everything that we're going through and that will be happening, and he was aware of exactly the remembrance, see? But when you're placed in a realm that everybody around you doesn't really remember and you have to teach them from scratch, it's like, it's a tall order. It's a tall order. And I think in many ways he chose Ibiza because he needed to be in a place that he could have a sanctuary. He needed to be in a place where he could level out those energies, because it's so consuming to do that, right? To give in that way and re-teach something that is already inside us, because it's been completely lost. Just like our origins have been lost, our history's been lost, everything's been lost. So what he had within him, I personally feel like he couldn't speak about a lot of what he knew, and that he held it in. And he only briefly described a few things, but he didn't even want to go in there, because it just sometimes it goes nowhere if people aren't ready, right? And this is a slow process for everybody remembering, because there's so much pain attached. There's such a tiny flit of an eye to our lives here in manifested state. We used to live thousands of years, right? Now the DNA has been so corrupted, and the overlays, that people are thinking that an 80-year-old is great. Well, what can you remember in 80 years? What can you retain in 80 years? What can you... Not much, right? So we're having to just pile in what we can in such a little time. Desperately, that would have in the past, just we would have had that evolution of remembrance. Now we don't. So there's a sense of panic, but there's also a sense that for a prophet, for a being that's come in having all this information, there is a very, very important sacred timing, because people are being unlocked at a certain point in time, and if you can't push that, and you can't give them the information prior to the unlocking, and he knew that. He knew that.
So he was preparing for the future.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
Who could grasp it now, but also who could grasp it later? I mean, that's why it was put into print. That's why it was put into... I mean, that's the only way why he would have even allowed it, because, to create a system out of it means he had to contain it. He had to not reveal a lot,
right,
for it to be presentable.
Yeah. And I think there was an aspect too of the information and the knowledge that was really a lot for him to carry, and I think it just became too much for him. And this is where we can talk about how he died, right? And we can talk about what he was experiencing, perhaps, when he went through what he went through. And there isn't a lot of information on his death. There's not a lot of information on him.
That's correct.
Which is fascinating.
Yeah.
But I just feel like there was, a lot that he was housing that wasn't really, he couldn't even express it.
So he would have been someone then who felt a huge burden, a huge inability to express what he really maybe needed to, or just weighed on him, to not be able to express.
Yeah.
I mean, this is someone who had such access to knowledge. When I look at his chart, I'm just like, oh my gosh, there's so much energy that flows in, so much knowingness. I mean, it would not stop for him with that genius channel, just, knowing, just a certain knowingness that would develop from time to time and that he would retain. But it's hard to say. I mean, I know with that, we know his ending was sudden, as far as what we've been informed of his death.
Yeah.
Which is usually the case with a defined spleen, human design person, or human design type chart. But yeah, it's hard to know. I mean, I almost want to ask, like, if we think of all the leaders of this century, all the other Ras, who were able to build some kind of empire. I mean, the only one that comes to mind now is maybe Osho, and there are others. But when they do that, like, they at some point they're not in control of what they've created. Does
Yeah,
that make sense?
totally. No, because because what they've come in to do is its own living thing.
Yeah. They're never in control.
They're the conduit, right? It's coming through them,
Yeah.
and they're like,
Mhm.
but it doesn't mean that you're in control of it. It has to come out. It has to come out
Yeah.
the way it has to come out.
Yeah.
You're still challenged with being in the flesh and living on a day-to-day level. Like, these are two separate things that have to collide, literally collide at this in the same space and time in the body of this realm where you have to survive every day, plus be a conduit, an instrument for all this to come through, and you have to get it out. It's no easy task, because you're not just living your life and trying to survive. It's like you're living your life and trying to survive and dealing with the physical matter here, at the same time being a brilliant cosmic conduit for all of this stuff that has to become manifested. You
So
have
what?
to bring it into manifestation. You are like literally the instrument of manifestation for it.
So it's like, what does that even mean, Lauda, in terms of like spiritual law, physical laws? I mean, it. So one then is the expression of the verse itself coming
Right,
forth.
right. That's why you have to be physically what you know. You can't just, you can't have those two separated. You can't just know things and then be a, like, if you're failing on the manifested level to bring that to fruition and like literally marry both spirit and body, then you are dismembered.
Oh, wow. So you're saying that, yeah, I get what you're saying, and I hope it's clear to everyone that what you are, I don't want to repeat it, but reiterate it, but I almost have to, you know what I mean? To
Yeah,
know,
totally. Yes.
to integrate it in, is that whatever you are bringing forth into this consciousness, into this density, you have to mirror that in your, it's almost like the personal and the private life has to or
Totally.
the personal public life has, that's a lack of responsibility for what?
That's a lack of responsibility, and that's a lack of everything that responsibility is.
Knowledge in itself is something that has to be responsible in its
And
expression.
right, you've failed to marry spirit and body. There is, you're in a manifested state because this is where everything has to come through. This is where everything has to be filtered through, and you have to literally take responsibility and become what that knowledge that you have is.
So has anyone ever succeeded?
Sure, people have succeeded. People succeed in that all the time. There's a lot
Okay.
of people that don't, right? But if there's a dissonance between the two, if let's say, for example, the reverberation is not able to come into the body properly, the disconnect and the dissonance will mean that you live out a very chaotic life, and you continue a life of utter self-sabotage, chaos, conflict. If you can't bring your spirit knowledge into the body and you're a manifested being, this is why you're here.
For that intersection of spirit and body.
Yeah, this is exactly why you're in the flesh, is to do that.
Wow.
It isn't just to have the knowledge out there and be an armchair, know-it-all, or an armchair prophet. No, no.
Yeah, because I mean, Ra talked about that in design. Like, it's not the knowledge you have, but it's not yours.
You have to bring it in the flesh.
And then he talked about it before. Like, what you're obligated to share your talents with the world, you know, to
You're
share that.
obligated to share it, but you're also obligated to be the living embodiment of it first before you can share it. You
Wow.
know, this is the thing, and if you can't, and if something's wrong,
It'll cause a schism, a crack that'll eventually.
absolutely causes a schism and a crack in your being.
Wow.
This is the challenge, right? Like, you're afraid to live, afraid to die. Well, you know what? Death and life are the same thing. So you might as well jump at it. It's the same thing. Your death is life. Your life is death. Okay? It's literally like at the point of our manifested state of being, when we occurred, there was this freaking huge explosion that we experienced. The explosion felt like we were dying when we were being birthed. That's what our birth was and is. So that's what life is. So what is there to fear? Just do it. Just go do it. I always just say, you know what? Adidas was right. They had it right. Just do it.
Ross said that was the only correct strategy for the manifestors, to just do it.
Just do it. That's how you merge your spirit knowledge with your body. You don't do it by sitting back going, yeah, I know it, but like you're a wreck, you know?
Yeah, it's such a bastion of contradictions on this plane, because I feel like all our thoughts, all our expressions that are not in line with where we want to go are just schisms, cracks.
We're self-deceptive by nature. Like everybody, right? Everybody's created a reality of self-deception.
Say that again.
Everyone's created a reality of self-deception, and like the nice and good programs, and the like speak softly and everything. Just don't really like do your shit. Enough already, you know? Like this is how it goes. There's no like nobody else is going to do it for you. No amount of knowledge that you've come in with and knowing and like prowess and genius is going to do it for you. It's going to stay there, over there, and here it's going to be a wreck. You're going to be driving a train wreck. And no amount of your amazing knowledge is going to do anything for you if you cannot bring it into the manifested state of being in full responsibility and just do it. Do whatever you need to. And for your inability or for anything, there are people who literally cannot feel anything, talk, and they're paralyzed from the neck down, and they have found ways to write books with like things that they use, technology. All right, if they can do that, I'm telling you, everybody who can walk and talk, short of being in a coma, right? This is what we have to do. This is our responsibility as manifested beings. We're not here so that we can just get around the law of ourselves and try and find shortcuts through other people, or like transfer our responsibility onto somebody else so that we can buy ourselves time. We're not here so that we can, screw the dog, or whatever that saying is, if you know what I'm saying. Like that, like you don't, we're here to do it for ourselves.
And as you noted, the transition to that space is that first we have the decondition, because the conditioning is totally against that. The conditioning is to depend on this, to depend on that, to be in constant codependency.
Totally.
Develop into a state of agency.
Every program here is like the reverse of helping us. Like, so it's all designed to screw us. But fine, once you know that, okay, you know that. So just, do what you need to. Knowledge is the power, right? Connect the dots. Knowledge is the power. You just step out in faith of yourself, because every single crutch that you give yourself, you are only burying yourself dead.
the agency is born of adversity. I mean, that is this plane, you know. We need that adversity. We need
Totally.
that conditioning before we can decondition.
But
Otherwise it's not, you know,
right. And I
read
think
into tattooed into it.
and I think this is what was challenging for Ra, by the way. I mean, it's challenging for all of us. Come on. It's very challenging for us all, but I think it was particularly challenging in different ways for Ra because he was such a bohemian. He was such a, just go by the wind person that it was, yeah, it was hard for him to stabilize, right? So when you bring in this knowledge into the matter of your manifested state of being, you need to be disciplined. You need to have that consistency in that discipline and keep doing it and not be sort of taken away by the wind for the next thing. So it would have been really challenging with that magnitude of information and knowledge to be able to, have that manifested in physical form. I think was a challenge for him. And it's a challenge for us all, right? But that's what we're called to do. So whether Ra died in the end, as we were discussing, from what you saw in his chart was an aspect that occurred that was a potential for some other huge energy that came in that he was needing to transmute, but perhaps didn't have the energy to do it again.
Yeah, the eighth house planets, and you know what that could have portended with, you know, eighth house rules death, you know, with how that may have came about. I mean, was he ready to go? Was he ready to still be present in life? Did he let go? You know what I mean? Like, where was he at that point? You know,
Because
did he?
I don't feel his death was natural.
Yeah.
I don't feel his body expired. In fact, when I go in there, what I feel is that he was, his cells were actually anti-aging. His body was actually functioning at a higher frequency than most, and it was like reversing a lot of disease and aging and all that. That's what I feel when I go in. Yeah, that he had an incredible energetic body working inside him.
You know, it's really hard with, I mean, in human design there's specific role gates and theme gates. In astrology there's different theories and ideas around what the responsibility is of the person in terms of the death. You know, is it,
Yeah,
what kind of death it is, and all of it is still very theoretical, you know. I mean, experiential in the sense of looking backwards, right, at the death charts. And
yeah, we don't know. We don't know. Does anybody know? Like,
yeah,
yeah. I
we
mean,
don't.
in other ways, I get that it would have been almost too much for a human body to be able to handle for too long.
Mhm. Especially, I mean, just in terms of his chart and who he is as a manifester, he would have been one to say, okay, have created the empire, and then okay, you guys handle it, you know, and then almost walk away, you
Yeah,
know.
yeah. But
And you know, maybe tending towards, you know, near the end.
he still, even if he walked away, he still was constantly getting downloads like this. Ra never stopped.
Oh, I hear what you're saying. Yeah, it's not like it stopped or something.
No.
Like this purpose errors.
Right. Yeah.
Wow. Wow.
So fascinating man, fascinating cosmic being, absolutely.
Incredible, incredible.
And
Phenomenal.
fascinating that, Mario, I want to thank you so much for your absolute incredible intuitive ability in merging not only astrology but human design and the asteroids and your intuitive signature over how all of this comes together, your ability to see it. Also, you're a musician and you're a writer, you're a creator.
Yeah.
You are incredible. So I want to really thank you. And I'd like for you to give everybody your contact information.
So thanks, Lauda. Thanks for inviting me so much. And thanks for the earlier discussions. I mean, you bring so much to it and you really helped me bring out even more, you know, and it was very validating. I love the way we interact and are able to kind of merge, you know, your psychic intuitions with what I can sometimes find as evidence in the chart. So thank you. And I'm going to go ahead and give you my information to put on the video. I'll probably just put my email.
Okay.
And yeah, that's about it.
And just maybe let people know that they could expect, you know.
If anyone's interested, I do charts, so you can feel free to contact me. And yeah.
Sounds good. And as for me, I just wanted to give a message to everyone that there is going to be a little bit of a wait in terms of production in this interim right now, as I'm, you know, altering and changing things. So if you don't see videos coming up for a little while, except for this one until the next one, it's because of that. I am now finished school, by the way, so I am back to my normal client schedule, just for everybody to know, because I know there's been a lot of really patient people, and I want to thank everybody immensely for that. So yeah, it's been an absolute pleasure having Mario, and I'd love to have you back to do another chart, and maybe we can have people request who they're interested in knowing about. So this is a little shout out for people. If you're interested in having someone's chart examined by Mario, you know, David Bowie, whoever, right?
Yeah, someone who's passed, you know, preferably, you know, don't want to.
Yeah, someone who's passed is definitely preferable.
Just symbols of the past. I like this thematic we have.
Yeah,
right
yes. So if there's somebody from the past that people are very curious to examine and to go deeper into, then maybe just drop us a line and let us know, and then we'll do a next video on that. So thank you everyone for being here, and thank you, Mario. Mwah.
Thank you, Lauda.
Been great. Good night.